Hello, veterinary friends. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I have a wonderful guest for you. I think you're really going to enjoy her. Her name is Dr. Shannon Bass, and she is the Vice President of Medical Leadership at Vets Pets and the President of the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Association, which I love because I love the state medical associations. And she is also an emergency medicine veterinarian for 17 plus years. And I'm so excited to talk to her today. Welcome to the podcast, Shannon.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here. We had a short chat before, so I know a few things about you, but I'm interested to learn all the things. So my first question to every person that I have on the podcast is to tell me their veterinary story.
My veterinary story starts when I was very young because my father married a veterinarian.
Oh, how interesting.
Stepmother was a veterinarian, and I was raised to some extent in her practice. My first job was working as what then was called a kennel girl. I'm sure we would not call it that
Kennel
now.
kid, I used to call them too.
Yeah, kennel kid.
I was one of those too back in the day.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
So I then kind of went on to have every job available in a veterinary hospital, with the exception of I'm not a registered technician. So I filled the role of what we would now call a veterinary assistant for many years. But I was a receptionist, which is absolutely the hardest job in a veterinary practice.
You. I think receptionists do have the hardest job in the hospital.
Yes. So I've done that and worked a little bit as a office manager type person. And then after vet school, an associate veterinarian, an emergency veterinarian, a medical director of a large 24-hour specialty practice.
Oh, wow.
Then I moved into recruiting, and then now I get to do a whole bunch of leadership development and communications work. And so it's been quite a progression.
Yeah, I love leadership. So that's going to be fun to learn about. So tell me about your ER experience. Like, what was it like to be an ER vet, and what did you love about it? What did you not love so much about it?
I became an ER vet by accident. I really never thought that I wanted to do that. And I was offered my first ER job, and I said to Dr. Bob Messenger, who ended up being my mentor, I said, no, I just don't think I want that lifestyle. Like, I'm not the kind of person that stays up all night. And he said, well, I hear you don't really like your current job very much. And that was true. And he said, so just come work for me for a little bit while you look for a different job.
He bamboozled you.
He did. And I said, okay.
That was a smart man.
I know. And I said, okay, I'll try it out. And I ended up staying in that job for 17 years.
Wow.
And turned out I really loved ER. Yeah, same place. Yeah. And I love not knowing what is going to come in, what's going to be the next case.
Yes.
I loved having just an amazing staff that we went through really hard things together, but we also laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed together and really supported each other. I tell my primary care vet friends all the time, I don't know how people do appointments, because it terrifies me to think that there's somebody in the lobby that needs to be seen at 10:30. And
you have to stay on time.
Stay on the schedule versus ER. It takes as long as it takes. And so I really enjoyed emergency medicine for sure.
That's really cool. So how did you go from working at the same place, at an ER place that you loved, to getting into the next step, which was,
the next step was recruiting.
Recruiting. Yeah. So how did you go from that to recruiting?
It was 17 years is a long time. It's longer than most people do full-time ER. And so I was still doing nights, weekends, holidays. And it was a combination of my body and my family, both having some opinions about that schedule.
Yeah.
And there really was one day that I will always remember of, I was leaving to go work a swing shift that started at 5 p.m. And my high school son was coming home from high school, and we passed in the driveway. And he said, hey, I really need to talk to you. And I couldn't stop and talk to him.
It breaks a mom's heart, right?
I
Because
needed
boys
I
don't want to
needed to
talk
go.
to you when they're teenagers all the time.
That's right. And so it was a pretty big deal, right? And
Yes.
I was like, can we talk tomorrow? And that was really hard. And so that was when I say my family had some opinions, it wasn't that they
Told
stated
you.
those.
Right.
It was more a
Struck
realization
you.
that I have two boys that are 3 years apart, and this was the oldest. And so kind of knowing that his brother was coming up behind him,
Right.
I kind of need to be here a little more when they are here.
Right. Right. So if
I
they
was
do want
gone.
to talk, you're available. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
was the start of it, of just what can I do? And so I went on this, gosh, probably year-long journey of looking at different jobs that I could transition to, from industry jobs to I applied to teach biology at a community college near my house, for which I have no
Interesting.
qualifications, but they didn't call me back. So I went on all kinds of different forays. Medical writing I looked at. I looked at going into primary care. And then I got offered this recruiting position. And I have told many people since then, when you're offered a job you're not qualified for, you should take it.
Oh, that's a good line. I've not heard that one.
Well, because you can always go back,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like
That's true. You could always
it,
quit.
but if you're not qualified for a job, meaning I had no education in recruiting or HR, but I'm really good talking to people and I know veterinary medicine. And so I ended up being really good at recruiting and really liked
Nice.
it. But um, if I hadn't taken it just because I felt like I wasn't qualified, then I would have missed out on a whole bunch of things that I learned.
Right. Right. You were afraid.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
you're like,
Yeah.
what? I don't know how to do that. What if I
Sure.
fail? And
Yes.
especially as veterinarians. So if I failed at recruiting, I could just go be a veterinarian.
Right. Right. Yeah. I love that because sometimes we get so intimidated by our own thoughts about the fear of failing or that thought, I don't know what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
that we get so afraid of that we don't take chances. And you took a
Right.
chance.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
turned out to be, like I said, I learned a lot because I got to see a lot of hospitals and
Right.
how a lot of hospitals operate because I was hiring for their hospital.
Right.
And so I got to learn about a lot of different operating methods and scheduling ideas. And I got to talk to so many veterinarians, which I love to do,
Yes.
and learn about what they were looking for.
Right.
And so it was really fun.
And help them find the perfect job for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it changed, like when you're a practicing clinical veterinarian, the success comes from solving that case puzzle, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And helping that animal get better. And so then when you move to recruiting, the success comes from that I have found the perfect fit for this veterinarian and
Right.
also filled a much needed opening for that hospital. So the
Yeah. So
wins,
it's a win-win.
yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. It's kind of like matchmaking, it sounds like
Mm-hmm.
to me. So what would you just say to people, and I don't want to stay on the recruiting thing too long, but what would you say to people that are looking for a different hospital situation or a different job situation in vet med? Because that happens to us fairly frequently, and I coach a lot of people through those transitions. Do you have any like nuggets of advice as a recruiter for how that's to work?
I would tell people to know what you want and spend some time writing that down.
Yes.
And everyone is looking for, I love it when I ask, what are you looking for in a new practice? And they say a positive work environment. And I always joke because no one has ever told me they were looking for a hostile work environment.
Of course, right. Or a
Right.
toxic. I want a
Yeah,
toxic team.
right.
They don't
So
say.
we know that you're looking for a positive work environment. Be more specific with yourself. Is schedule really important to you? Is time off really important to you? Is continuing education opportunity and allowance and time really important to you?
Right.
Like, what is really important to you? So that you're not just evaluating hospitals based on, I liked it there, right?
Right.
That you have really specific things that you know you're looking for. And I think that
Yes.
helps people find a better position.
It absolutely does. I think knowing what you love
Mm-hmm.
about, any given job and what you don't love really does help you get to that what exactly am I looking for? And you have to be kind of nitpicky about it.
Yeah.
Like,
And
do you want
sometimes,
2 doctors there? Do you want 4? Do you want 8? You know,
Right.
what sounds like it would be perfect for you, and then go and look for that perfection. Even though
Yeah.
you might have to give up one or two things on that list,
Hmm.
because it may not exist the way you envision it. But if you get most of the things you want, then you're definitely going to be happier.
And it depends on where you are too, right? If you're maybe you're moving for your spouse and so you're moving and you have no choice on geography,
Right, right.
well, then you can't be as picky
Of course, yeah.
um, because you have already a limit.
Less to
So
choose from. Yeah,
you got to know what you're looking for, what your limits are.
yeah. Okay, so I have two things I want you to talk about for sure. And I'm not sure which one we want to do first, but I know because now you're the president of the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Association, and I love organized veterinary medicine. I was on my state board for years, and I still work with them very intimately and do a lot of work for them. So I'd kind of like you to tell me a little bit about that, and then how the hurricane affected your state. That's interesting to me.
I also love organized veterinary medicine. I started being involved even as a veterinary student. And so definitely was always interested in that. And I feel like so many of the things I've gotten involved in have happened a little bit by accident. I originally thought I wanted to be on the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Board. So that's the
The Board of
regulatory,
Veterinary Medicine. Yeah.
mhm, so that's the regulatory group. And I approached our then executive director of the association to ask her how I got on the how do I get on the board?
Do that. Yeah.
And she convinced me that I didn't want to be on the board, that instead I wanted to serve on the association.
Slightly selfishly on her
Yeah,
part, right?
I think looking back for sure.
Yeah.
And so I started serving, and I've served as a district representative for the Charlotte area for several years, and then moved on to that executive committee. And again, I was really naive. And when they asked if I wanted to be the secretary treasurer, I didn't understand that I would then progress for the next 5 years and
You're in the
eventually,
loop, right? You're in that executive committee
yeah,
loop, and
I didn't know that.
you have to have all the positions, including president. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so it wasn't until the next year when they were like, now you're going to become vice president, that I was like, okay, now I'm
Like
starting to
what?
see what's happening here.
Yeah, yeah. It's a little intimidating, right? To think that you're the president of the state.
Yeah. And what
Yeah,
does that mean?
right.
And then what that meant really changed for a short period of time in October of this year when Hurricane Helene came through and just devastated Western North Carolina.
Yeah.
And myself and the executive director of the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Association were invited. So the storm hit on a Thursday night, Friday morning at the end of September. So we were invited on Monday, so four days after the storm, to the state emergency response call. And I really think we were invited as a courtesy. And that's very much, I didn't have a role. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
I was just listening and doing what a lot of us do when we're listening to something that's not really our thing. I think I was returning emails and not completely paying attention because
Right. Right.
it wasn't really my thing, right?
Yeah.
And they mentioned that there was a need to help organize veterinary volunteers
Mm.
because just over the 4 days since the storm hit, there had been an outpouring of veterinarians that wanted to go into the disaster area and help.
And help. Yeah.
And because there was so much to do, they asked for help. And that ask just went out to, there were a lot of people on this call, a lot of different government agencies and other response groups and things like that. And no one said anything. And the request came again. And so I unmuted myself and I said, I think that's something the NCVMA can help with because organizing veterinarians seems like part of our mission.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I would think.
And so I didn't really know what I had volunteered for.
Of course.
And that really evolved over the next few days to we opened up a Google form on our website, and the NCVMA staff developed a whole bunch of resources on our website. And we ended up collecting almost 400 names of people that wanted to volunteer from as far away as California,
Wow.
and people that had all different kinds of qualifications. Some of them had mobile units that they were willing to bring in. Some were relief veterinarians that, had some free days. Some had technical prior experience with disasters. So there was this whole range of people, mostly veterinarians, but a good number of technicians, some human medical folks. We had some RNs on that list and
Nice.
paramedics and this whole group of people. But we couldn't do anything with them on those first few days because there was still no communication. Like all the
Right.
cell communication was still
Right. You had no
down.
idea what you needed to do.
Right. So then at first it was just organizing who was available. And then we started getting requests from the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and search and rescue teams that were officially deployed to the area saying, we need to treat an animal here, we need to treat an animal there. And so I would reach out to the list, and I had vets that would drive 2 hours and get on an ATV and get driven up to see one dog. And then
Wow.
they would reverse that and go home.
Wow.
And they were all doing that with their own supplies because there
Right.
wasn't a centralized place where you would go and just pick up a lot of veterinary supplies to go do
Sure.
this.
Yeah.
We also had to provide a veterinarian for every shelter. And there are two different kinds of shelters I'm talking about. One is an existing animal shelter that they had, in preparation for the storm, the Department of Ag had cleared most of the animal shelters. They had moved animals. And then as animals are found post-storm, they get taken into the shelters and they need to be evaluated by a veterinarian.
Right.
So we were putting volunteer veterinarians in charge of those locations. And then there were also emergency human shelters that people were allowed to bring their pets.
Mm,
And we had to have a veterinarian in charge of all of those
for
locations
that.
as
Yeah.
well. So we were using that list. Those had to be veterinarians, though, that were basically located in the disaster area because they needed to be available every day to some extent.
Right. Right.
So it couldn't be someone that was 2 hours away.
And these are people
So
that lost their homes as well, right?
potentially,
These veterinarians.
or some of them, they
Oh,
didn't lose their home, but they had no power or water, or there were only certain
supplies.
pockets of cell,
Right.
or certain pockets where they could get internet.
Right.
So you could communicate with these folks every 1 to 2 days.
Interesting. Yeah.
So those were some of the
Amazing.
initial things that we were doing in those first weeks. Then we started supporting a veterinarian who she's an associate veterinarian at a practice that was destroyed. And she wanted to help her clients and her community. So she started doing a free pop-up clinic. And so we started helping her with some logistics, some initial supplies that we got donated. The first week, there was no insulin in the area because of all the power loss.
No refrigeration. Yeah.
Yeah. And so our president-elect spent a whole day working with vendors and different animal hospitals to find Vetsulin. And then a volunteer vet from Charlotte drove 20 bottles of Vetsulin up to the area. Mainly, we distributed out of one emergency clinic that was operational and out of this pop-up clinic. And we just started getting word to the veterinarians in the area, like, you can go to these places to get Vetsulin.
You get the insulin. Wow. So things that you would not think. Like,
Mm-hmm.
were you shocked by how much there was to figure out and how much there was to do in a disaster like that, that there was no like rules?
Yeah, it was so strange. Just the requests were coming from all different places, that
Yeah.
you'd have independent one doctor practices in the mountains of North Carolina that were reaching out to us saying, I need vaccines and Vetsulin, and I still
That's
don't
still
have
trying to
power or
work
water.
and we have no power. Wow. Yeah, crazy, crazy
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So something you would never have thought that you'd be involved in as the president of the VMA.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah. Did you find it stressful or, I mean, I don't want to say enjoyable because that's probably not the word, but challenging? Like, what did you think about this whole situation? I know it was probably heartbreaking to hear the stories.
It was pretty overwhelming for about 2 weeks.
Okay.
I remember at one point something else happened in national news that had nothing to do with the hurricane. I don't remember what it was. And my husband asked me a question about it. And I
Yeah.
said, I don't know what you're talking about. And And he said, "Have you been living under a rock?" And I said, "Basically, yes, a
Yeah,
hurricane rock."
the Hurricane Helene rock.
That was all I was really doing. And I live in Charlotte, which is 2 hours from the disaster area, and I didn't go there for a few weeks because I was actually more effective here with my 3 computer screens, my
Right.
consistent power and internet. I have 2
Yeah.
cell phones that I was constantly using
Trying to call
because,
people and get them
yeah,
where they needed to be.
I was making connections and I needed to make those connections from here. And it was pretty, like I said, pretty overwhelming for about 2 weeks. And then it started to get a little more manageable.
Yeah. So how do you think you were prepared uniquely to handle this compared to anyone else?
I think the fact that I worked emergency for so long was very helpful
Truth.
because I made decisions without a whole lot of extra information or necessarily a lot of backup.
Okay. You kind of
About
wing it.
Yeah, there was a decent amount of winging it.
Okay.
um, and just, this is clearly the right thing to do, and so we're not going to ask a whole lot of permission from different people.
We're
We're
just
just
gonna
going to
do it.
do it.
Yeah.
But I think it all worked out really well. So I think that, and then I was just incredibly grateful to Vets Pets, my employer, who gave me space and time to do
Yeah.
this. And I reached out to our CEO, my boss, on that Monday and said, "I just volunteered for something. I'm not sure what it's going to mean, but I do think it's going to suck up some of my time in the near future." And he was very supportive of me doing that. And so a lot of folks pitched in to cover for me and help. And so
Nice.
that was, I think, unique, that had I been a day-to-day practicing veterinarian as the president of the NCVMA, I don't think we could have done it like this.
Right. So what's the situation there now? Is it still very chaotic or are things getting back to normal?
I was actually just talking this morning to a veterinarian in Asheville. So I have an update that's just hours old.
Awesome. That's awesome.
A lot of things are pretty normal. Everybody now has all their services back, but it was a long time. The city of Asheville did not have potable water for at least a month. And so they do now all have services. He said there's still sections of road that are not as wide as they used to be.
Yeah.
And because part of the road was washed away, but they can drive on the road, but only one
They'll get
vehicle at a
through.
time.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
not a two-way road anymore, it's a one-way road. And he said
Right.
it's weird
Right.
how you just get used to that and
Yeah.
you start to think that it's normal. So
Just
we were
adapt.
we were having that conversation exactly about how people do just adapt and just think this is normal now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And just get used to what is rather than fighting with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And whole sections of town, there's a historic area that was very low lying next to the French Broad River, and that location was took about 8 to 10 feet of water, that whole area. So a lot of
I
buildings
do
in that
imagine.
area are just being razed and just,
Yeah.
bulldozed to the ground.
It's so hard to imagine 8 feet of water in your home or your hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. Yeah. And I'm sure loss of lives.
Yes, the storm resulted in over 200 deaths total. Not all of that was in North Carolina because, of course,
Right.
it made landfall in Florida and so
Right.
then traveled up. So there was
Yeah.
damage in other locations than North Carolina.
Right. But it hit there the hardest, I believe,
Yeah.
the
The other
flooding.
really interesting thing that we became aware of in like week 3 was what I'm calling the ethics of free care. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is in week 3, we now had some national veterinary groups coming in with mobile trailers, um, like ASPCA, for example, things like
right.
that,
And
to
offering free stuff.
to provide free veterinary care, which is
Right.
great. And the vet we were helping, she was still providing her free pop-up clinic in her community. But by week 3, we had most practices were open to some extent, and
Right.
they were ready to see their clients
Yeah. And charge money for it.
because they needed to pay their staff.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I started hearing from members saying, "I need to pay my staff, but I don't have clients walking in the door. And they were reaching out to ask about grants and other opportunities for them to not have to lay off their staff, because the staff
Yeah.
can be laid off and then they can collect disaster unemployment.
Okay.
But you don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, that's
You
not
would
ideal.
rather get your business running again.
Going, yeah.
Um, but so then they started calling and saying, can you reduce the amount of free care that's happening in the area? And but I said, I'm talking to the people that are providing free care, and the people that they're seeing have nothing.
Right. Yeah. So they need it.
Right. But then
Right.
there were also veterinarians coming from out of state just on their own who had collected donations from their community in a different state.
Right.
And they wanted to come in and set up in the back of their truck in the Walmart parking lot and see patients.
Right.
And so I was connecting with some of those veterinarians and saying, have you reached out to the animal hospital that's a half mile from the Walmart where you want to set up,
Right.
and talked
Are you
to your
taking their
colleague?
business? Yes.
And they had not. And I said, well, why don't I connect you with that veterinarian and
Mhm.
you can reach out and see what they might need. And so those connections always went very, very well. And sometimes that veterinarian ended up driving down and donating those supplies to that hospital.
Perfect. Yeah.
And so that was a lot of the activity that was happening in weeks 3 and 4, was just making those connections between veterinarians so that we can make sure that we're truly supporting each other,
Right.
and that we still have clinics in business 6 months after the disaster to treat
Yeah.
animals
So
for
they're
the
not
long term.
shutting down because they're going bankrupt.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I
Because
never
that would be
anticipated
tragic.
that.
Yeah, that would be tragic if you survive the hurricane and then you lose your business because of that.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and you don't think that that would be an issue.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so that was something you learned.
And then we collected donations from across the country. We had big groups. The AVMF gave us quite a bit of money. Then the Veterinary Emergency and Critical Care Society made a big donation. Other VMAs made significant donations.
Nice.
And so we opened up several different types of grants. We opened up what we call the Veterinary Community Grant, which is for any veterinary staff member that was employed on the date of the hurricane, full-time at a veterinary hospital, could apply for a $300 grant. And that's all they had to prove, is that they were an employee. So we've
Nice.
given away over 100 of those. And then we had the veterinary practice grant that would reimburse practice owners for any free care that they provided
Okay.
after the storm, as
Right.
well as reimbursement for any damages if they had to pay to have their practice professionally cleaned or repaired or anything like that.
Right.
And so that was a $2,000 grant that was, and still is, both of these grants are available on our website. So we were able to take those donations and get them directly into the hands of veterinarians and veterinary staff members and make a difference that way.
I love that. So without dragging this on too long with the state VMA, tell people why they should get involved in organized veterinary medicine in their state or nationally if they want to do AVMA or AHA or any of those type of things. Why should they do it? Because you and I both think it's really a important thing.
We're always better when we are together. And there's no possible way that an individual practitioner can be aware of all of the issues facing our profession. And so you're relying on your state VMA and AVMA to be aware of those issues on a state and a national level. And I hear a lot of that say, well, I don't ever see them doing anything for me. And I feel like it's kind of like public health, that
Right.
if it's going well, you shouldn't hear a lot
Right.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's not going well, then you start to have your services taxed.
You might notice. Yeah.
Then you have drugs that are suddenly not available in your state anymore because no one was paying any attention.
Right. Or you have laws passing that don't serve
Mm-hmm.
you in your
Exactly.
business. Right.
And so there are a lot of things happening, and you have this experience, as do I, that once you get involved and you see all the things that are happening behind the scenes that your your individual practitioner is not aware of, you realize, wow, there's a lot of work happening.
Yes. Yeah. And I also think I tell this to people when I talk to them that are in vet med. It's very good as an individual to get involved, not only from the learning of what goes on behind the scenes, but also the relationships that you build with the other veterinarians in your
Yes.
state that you would never meet. I
Mhm.
have very good friends today that I never would have met had I not been on a board or a
Mhm.
committee or, been the president or all of these things. It gives you this community that it kind of expands what you would normally do in vet med, and it gives you other people to kind of lean on and talk to, and just really great veterinary relationships.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, you meet some awesome leaders in organized vet med. And I would encourage people that if you think about it and you feel intimidated by it, it's not really that big of a deal. Like, you can get on a board and not have one scotch of an idea of what you're doing,
Right.
and you'll figure it out.
Yes.
Everybody's like, well, I don't know what to do and I don't know anything about it. And it's like, well, the way you learn is you just get on, volunteer in your local VMA, and then maybe to your state, be the representative, and you'll learn the rest. Like, I didn't
Yes.
have any idea what you said. You were on the executive committee and you're like, I don't know anything about this. I was the same.
Yeah. And now I know a lot about a
Sure.
lot.
Yeah. And you were able to do it. You were
Yes.
you're a successful president, and so was I, and just learned so much just by doing. So
Mhm.
it's not as intimidating as people seem to think. Like, we're
Not at
not
all.
geniuses on the board.
No. And we have, to your point, a lot of committees that it's, a very low level of commitment.
Sure.
But we want veterinarians on our committees so that we truly are representing a lot of voices in veterinary medicine, and not just mine or the other members of the executive committee. We
Right.
want other people to be involved. Very
Yeah.
important.
And you can dabble. You can just volunteer for a committee position.
Mhm.
I'm the chair of the Leadership Development Committee in Michigan. And you can just volunteer to be on a committee. You don't have to be in
Right.
charge of anything. You just have to show
Nope.
up to a meeting and listen and throw in your 2 cents once in a while. And that's all there is to it. It's simple.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I'm going to get off of that. Is there anything else we need to know about that whole situation before I pull us in another direction?
If you want to help, we are still giving away money. And so you can go to the NCVMA
Perfect.
website and you can make a donation, and even a small donation helps. And, I just talked about where those dollars are going. They're going
Yeah,
directly to veterinarians and staff.
I love that. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your current position as the Vice President of Medical Leadership at Vets Pets. And tell me a little bit about that, and not necessarily how you got there, but what you do and what you like about it.
I get to do all kinds of different things in my job, which I love. Every day is really different.
Variety.
Some days it's, truly operational things, like talking about just flow in a hospital and who does what to get folks in and out of the practice and be seen efficiently, right? So some days it's more stuff like that. Other days it's talking to early career veterinarians about some of the struggles that they're having. And then other days, our model is a partner model. So our practices have a veterinarian who is a part owner with Vets Pets. And so they are partner doctors. And so other days it's talking to partner doctors and helping them with leadership and communications and answering questions that they have. So I get to do all kinds of different things, which I really enjoy the fact that, and I think that goes back to the ER doctor in me, that I enjoy every day being different.
Yeah, you never know what's going to walk through the door. And
Right.
it's the same for this. And you've been there how long?
I've only been in this position, gosh, what is it? About 18 months
Oh, okay. So this is a pretty new, and
Yeah,
this is a new company as well.
for me.
A pretty young company.
No, they've been a company since 2008. So the
Oh,
company's
okay.
been
So they've
around
been
for
around
a
a
while.
while. Okay, but it's
Yeah.
new to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there a lot of difference between the kind of job that you're in now and you being a recruiter or working at the ER? Like, what are the differences if someone were to say, hey, someday I want to be vice president of medical leadership?
Yeah, I mean, it's different, but it's so many common themes, right? Because while I'm not seeing clients, I was talking to one of our partner doctors yesterday about a client that is complaining. And we were talking about just the medicine involved in that case, as well as the communication with that client.
Right.
And so I was doing a lot of that as a practicing veterinarian and a medical director of
Right.
my
So it
practice.
applies.
And so that experience applies. And so it's helpful for that partner doctor to have me as someone that we can get on the phone and talk through it and make a plan together.
Yeah. Someone
So
that understands how to do that.
exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of similarities, and then it's just a lot of people. And our our job, even though we have a job that's about animals, we all know that our job is really about people.
Yes.
And so
100,
my
100%. Well, maybe 90% people, 10%
90%
animals,
people.
right?
So my job is still a lot about people.
Right.
And, talking to veterinarians, working with hospital managers, I talk a lot about the relationship between our partner doctors and their managers. And if that relationship is good and they are working together, then things are going to be good in the hospital. If
Sure.
those two are not in sync, then things don't feel as good in the practice.
That's a
And so
problem. Yeah. Big
we
problem.
work on that. And I like to use your podcast as actually a way to connect with some veterinarians,
Awesome.
that if I'm wanting to work on like feeling overwhelmed at work, and if I want to have conversations about that with veterinarians, then you have a podcast on that topic. And so I'll have them listen to that podcast, and then we meet together on a call and talk through the podcast. And it's been super helpful to use that as a springboard for conversation.
That's amazing. Like I sit here and do this podcast almost every day. I'm recording and you just don't know who's listening. And to have you say that, I use your podcast. I'm like, oh, it makes me so happy because, so you're sitting behind this microphone and that's why I like doing interviews because it feels a little bit better than sitting here by yourself. But just the fact that, as a veterinarian, I'm also helping other veterinarians, which is my goal in doing this. And that you're using that to help your veterinarians is really exciting. So I
It
appreciate you saying that.
well, I appreciate your time spent doing it because it saves me time, honestly,
Sure.
because
Yeah, it's a
what the
tool.
podcast you've done helps introduce concepts, and then the conversations that I have make those concepts specific to
Right.
that
For their
veterinarian and
situation.
their practice.
That's amazing. I love that. So you mentioned to me either in an email or before we got on this call, something about moral injury in veterinary
Mhm.
medicine. Can you explain what that means to me and to the listeners and what your thoughts are on that?
Moral injury is shorten it, it is knowing what's right, but not being able to do what's right.
Yeah, I love that.
And so,
I've not heard that concept, that word
mhm,
used, but that's interesting.
like a big example that helps people to understand moral injury pretty quickly is the height of COVID, early COVID, when human caregivers didn't have the resources to treat everyone.
Sure.
And so decisions had to be made that we're going to treat this patient, not that patient.
Right. That weren't
Well, they
ideal.
know the right thing is to treat all the patients,
Right.
but they can't treat all the patients.
Sure.
And really, the key to moral injury, and the longer definition actually, is the psychological consequences of a betrayal, and that's really important, betrayal of what's right by someone who holds legitimate authority in a high stakes situation. So that's the more complete definition. And the reason betrayal is so important is that's what distinguishes moral injury from post traumatic stress or something like that. And let's go back to the COVID example, there was a betrayal of by like hospital leadership, supply chain availability, government, it's a nebulous source of the betrayal in the COVID
Correct.
example.
But it was there.
But there's someone in an authority position that could not provide those caregivers with the appropriate supplies to treat the patient.
Right. Right.
Right.
And they were helpless to change that.
Right. So that's what makes it moral injury, is that you were forced to take actions because of someone else's betrayal of their responsibility.
Right. And it's injury because you are being forced to act outside of your own moral character.
Right.
You're making decisions based on what someone else is forcing you to do almost.
Yes. So
okay.
How do we translate that to the veterinary space?
Right.
The owner who refuses to leave their respiratory distress dog in the hospital on oxygen because they say that the dog can't be without the owner.
Right.
So the owner takes that respiratory distress dog home. So that is moral injury, because in that case, the betrayal is the owner is
right.
betraying, like, this compact that we're going to work together to take care of this pet.
Yes.
And so you are heartbroken by the fact that this dog is leaving the hospital untreated.
Right.
And you couldn't control that. It's definitely outside of what you think is morally the right thing to do.
Sure.
And so then what do we tend to do as humans in that situation, as veterinary staff? We tend to vilify the owner.
Yes, we get angry. Yeah, we do. We blame the owner for the situation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we not do typically is we rarely talk about our own feelings in that situation. So it's more common in that situation for me to say, I can't believe that horrible person took that dog home to suffer.
Right.
Instead of saying, I am so sad that she took that dog.
Yes.
It is really making me heartbroken,
frustrated. Yeah.
And inviting the other staff members around me to also express the emotions I'm sure they have about that situation. Because the biggest solution to moral injury is to talk about it in community where we understand.
Process it, yeah.
But if we just flip to client bashing, that feels good in the moment. It really does. And it's easy and lazy. And that's why we do it.
Right. Yeah. It's easier to blame someone else and not take responsibility for our own emotions. Yeah.
But then we're not, especially as veterinarians, if I'm the one that starts the client bashing, then everyone's going to jump on that train, and we're never going to start talking about how sad that made us.
Right. Yeah.
And there's so many examples. Like, that's an obvious one, but the constant financial conversations that we have with owners, right? Where they refuse treatment for whatever reason. And then especially if they double down by blaming us.
Right.
For not treating the pet.
Because that's just them not dealing with their emotions. Mm-hmm. It's like us client bashing, then they're vet bashing. It's exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same thing. But there is a moral injury when I say, this is what we should do for your pet. And they say, I can't pay for that. And you should treat my pet because you love animals.
Right.
So that's them again. It's the same deal. They're betraying kind of this agreement that we're going to work together to help this pet.
Yes. Right.
And so while it might not be as severe as the COVID situation or other big examples of moral injury, because it was originally a term that was applied in military situations. Mm-hmm. So it might not be as dramatic as that, but for us as veterinary staff, it's daily.
It builds. Yeah. It's like little nicks in your armor. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the reason it's so important to, in my opinion, to know what it is and talk about it is people will often confuse a moral injury situation with burnout, compassion fatigue, post-traumatic stress, things like that. But the way that we address it is different. If I'm burned out, I might need to change my schedule. Right. Or, think about meditation or, rest and things like that. Compassion fatigue. We need to talk about the solutions for that.
Right.
Post-traumatic stress, very real in some of our situations in veterinary medicine. But if I have moral injury, me taking a vacation is not going to fix that.
Correct. Right. Because you haven't
I
dealt with the emotion that you
Right.
have suppressed. Because you've
Mm-hmm.
basically you're gunny sacking all those emotions by
Right.
just blaming the client or whatever and
Mm-hmm.
not dealing with your own thoughts about it. Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's so important to talk about it and educate people that moral injury is a specific thing
Right.
and is
Yes.
different than some of the other
I love that. Yeah.
issues that we face in veterinary medicine,
Absolutely true.
because we all have stories that we don't want to share with our non-veterinary family and friends.
Yes.
That should be an indicator for you that you might have a moral injury issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I am afraid to share this story with my family because I think they're going to be upset by my story, I need to share it with someone.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably my colleagues, the people I work with, the people that will not be appalled.
Right. They'll understand the position that
Yes.
you're in when you're kind of forced to
Mm-hmm.
take certain actions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, that's something that we could talk another 2 hours about.
I know.
Really? Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sorry I left that till towards the end of the podcast, but maybe we'll get back together and talk about this more. I think as you're talking about it, and because I haven't used that term before, moral injury, it makes so much sense because there's so many times that, we do a euthanasia that we don't necessarily agree with,
Mm-hmm.
or we don't get to do a euthanasia that we think should
Yes.
be done. And the people are like, well, I don't believe in euthanasia. I'm going to take this pet home and let it die at
Mm-hmm.
home. And that hurts us. And
Mm-hmm.
it's over and over and over again. And you
Yes.
kind of get good at either just ignoring that, or you can learn to process it, which I feel like I have over the years. But just the fact that that happens so often,
Yes.
and almost, when you were talking, it reminded me of a woman that came in one day with this cat, and I've known her for years. She's very gruff. She's very opinionated. She's very rough around the edges. And she brought her cat in, and I think the cat had dental disease or something and was painful in its mouth and needed a dental and needed teeth pulled. And the first thing she said to me, she said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not putting this cat through that, and I'm not spending that money, like very gruffly to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of taken aback, but not really, because I knew her and I knew that that's the way she responded to things. And so had I not kind of tried to understand her and kind of combine with her to figure out a solution for this cat, knowing that it needed a dental, but she wasn't going to do it.
Right.
Had I carried that negative emotion with me, it would have been a different scenario than me just understanding her and saying, okay, well, let me ask you what you are willing to do, because this cat is in
Mm-hmm.
pain. We
Mm-hmm.
need to do something for this cat. So we either need to put her down, or we need to find some really high quality pain medicine. And like, we need to have some solutions if you're not absolutely not going to do the dental. And so because I was able to work with her and understand where she was coming from, because she had her own thoughts about putting this cat under, she thought that would be harmful,
Right.
that I think it would have been a different outcome for her and me,
Yeah.
because we were both suffering from moral injury, I guess you'd say, because
Mm-hmm.
she didn't want to do what I thought was right. I didn't want to do what she thought was right. And so we had to come to some like agreement for this cat. And after the fact, after she eventually put that cat down, she was very appreciative of what I did for her and the cat. She
Because
thought
you
it was
took
the
the
right
time.
decision,
Yeah.
and it was just getting her through to that point where she was ready to let that cat go. But those kind of situations we face constantly.
All the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very common.
And then there's, if you're in an environment where you're not very influential in your practice, and maybe there are policies that are put in place by people that you don't even know,
Right.
that, force you to do things that you think are not right. That can be depending on the severity, that can be a cause of moral injury.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, So when you start to think about it, the betrayal is the important piece, right? That's what really puts it into that category of moral injury, that somebody in a position of authority, like the owner of the animal or
your boss,
your boss, a leadership
your
position,
managing vet, your
they have
corporation
to,
even.
yeah, they
Yeah.
have to do something that is a betrayal of what's right, that forces you into an action
That
that
you don't agree with.
right.
Yeah, I love that. Well, maybe what we'll try to do is get together on another podcast and really go through this in detail, because I would like to talk more about it and what the solutions are. I mean, I have a lot of ideas about solutions from the life coaching standpoint and how to coach yourself through all of that. But I'm sure you have a lot of ideas as well about how to solve for that and not let it take you down, because it very well could.
It very well could. And it does make me, when I became aware of this, it really made me think how much of this is happening in vet med, and we're calling it the wrong thing. We're calling it burnout.
Yeah.
We're calling it compassion fatigue.
Right.
And we wonder why we can't get past it. And then we see so many people leaving the profession.
Right.
And I wonder how much of that is because we aren't even addressing what their actual biggest problem is.
Yeah. And on some level, if you're going to stay in vet, well, if you're going to stay as a human, I guess, but if you're going to stay in vet med or a situation where you're not 100% in charge, which I would argue that you never are in life.
Yes.
But that you are going to have to deal with some of these things.
Yeah.
Like this is something that you're going to have to learn how to deal with and feel, so it doesn't take you down. You can't fix it and get rid of it altogether.
Right.
You know, you can do some of that by becoming the owner of the practice, which I did, because the first doctor I worked for when I got out of vet school had totally different morals than I did. And I had to do a lot of things under him that I didn't agree with. And I wasn't smart enough, because I was young, to just quit. You know, I thought I could change him, you know. So that's a long story. And some people that listen to me know that story. But just being in that situation, you can change some of it. You just can't change all of it in our work.
Yeah. And so recognizing what's in my hula hoop and what's out of my hula hoop is an important strategy, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, it became very interesting to me as I learned about this and thought about how it affects veterinarians and veterinary staff. And so I think it's important for us to start talking about.
Well, and also knowing that everybody has different thoughts about different things. And so you might be in a hospital where everyone has a different opinion. And they might think you have the wrong moral idea, but they have the right one. And so you've got that thrown in as well.
And that requires
judging each other.
Continuous communication.
Absolutely.
So that we understand where we're all coming from, and that assuming positive intent and all of those types of things.
Yeah, I love that. Well, maybe if you're willing, we'll get back together again. Maybe after the first of the year, or whenever you're available, we could talk about this specific topic in detail.
That sounds great.
Because I would love to come up with examples and teach people how to deal with it and how to talk about it and how to open it up in their practice for discussion, so it doesn't become, finger pointing at each other. Like, well, you did that wrong and you should have done that. I can see where that happens a lot in our practices if it's not dealt with properly. Yeah, I disagreed with that decision. I love that. Okay. So if you're willing, let's do that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. So is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have?
I don't think so. When we're talking about this kind of stuff. No.
We got through a lot.
I know we did.
But I think we could probably go on another couple of hours. At least I know. All right. So let's tell people, if they want to learn more about you, if they want to learn more about Vets Pets, if they want to get involved in the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Association, how can they get in touch with you to learn more or ask questions of you?
So my short answer is going to be LinkedIn. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn.
That's valid. That's how I find some stuff.
The longer part of that answer is that I decided for 2024 that I was going to post on LinkedIn every day. And I have done that. So
good for you. For the whole year?
Yes, every
Oh,
day.
boom. I love goals like that because that's a hard goal.
It's a hard
That's
goal.
difficult.
And it's been something that I learned every day that I've
Yeah,
posted.
I love that.
So
So if they look at your LinkedIn, they could learn something every day for
every single day.
2025.
Yeah. And I don't
Oh,
know, I'm going to see if I'm going to keep it going. I'm right now just being proud of myself that I
yes.
have made it through
Yes.
2024. So
That's awesome.
I'm
Yeah. When
easy
you
to
get
find
that
on
stuff
LinkedIn.
going, it's hard to stop.
It kind of is. And it's funny, I will see people at conferences and they'll say, "Do I know you?" And I'm like, "I don't think so." And they'll say, "Yeah, your name's so familiar." And then they'll go, "You're the curiosity person."
On
Because
LinkedIn.
yes,
I love that. That's
that's been
awesome.
funny.
All right. So you can go to LinkedIn and find out more. And if you have any questions, you can send them to me and I can get a hold with Shannon and we can, and if you are interested in this moral injury topic, which I am, so I'm sure we'll get back together and do this. I'll definitely make sure that happens, but maybe put some scenarios out there that we could talk about. If I could get some scenarios that people actually went through, maybe we could
Yeah,
do like a specific discussion about it. That'd be fun.
definitely. Hmm.
Okay, so if you think about it, send me some of those by email
Okay.
or contact me on my website. That'd be fun.
Yeah,
Well, this has been so enjoyable. It's been great
same.
meeting you. I'm so happy that I
Agreed.
met you, and I'm gonna have to go to your LinkedIn now and check that out because that's awesome. That gives me an idea for 2025 for me. I used to blog every week, and then I kind of backed off from the blog to do my book, and then I just never got back on the horse of every week. So I gotta challenge myself to do that in 2025. So
It's hard.
you've
Like, it takes a lot of
inspired me.
discipline. It really does to
It
do it.
absolutely does. But once you get on a roll, it becomes a habit and then it gets easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, everyone, thanks so much for listening. This is Dr. Shannon Bass. So look her up and check her out. And I promise to have her back again. If you loved this podcast, just let me know. And it's been delightful to meet you.
Thanks for having me. It's been
Have a
fun.
beautiful week, everyone. Bye. Bye, Shannon.